Terry, thank you so much for hopping on. Why don't you just kind of give us a quick introduction on who you are and who you serve?
Well, Jordan, thanks for having me on. I'm really looking forward to talking with you today. Yeah, I'll give you a little bit of background. Born and raised on the south side of Chicago, I am the oldest of three boys. You can't tell this from my voice or looking at me, but I'm 6'8" tall. And I actually went to college at the Citadel in Charleston, South Carolina, on a basketball scholarship, despite having three knee surgeries in high school. When I graduated from college, I moved home to find a job. I'm really going to date myself now, but this was long before the internet was available to help people find employment. Fortunately, I found that first job in the corporate headquarters of Wendy's International, the hamburger chain, in their marketing department. That was the good news. The bad news was I ended up living with my parents for the next 3.5 years as I helped my mom care for my father and my grandmother, who were both dying of different forms of cancer. After that, I went to work for the hospital that actually cared for my father and my grandmother. And then at 37, made a major pivot in my life and became a police officer. And part of what I did during my law enforcement career was I was a SWAT hostage negotiator. After that, started a school security consulting business, coached girls high school basketball when we lived in Texas. But for the last almost 13 years now, I've been battling a rare form of cancer, a rare form of melanoma. Just finally, my wife and I have been married for 31 years. We have one child, a daughter, who's a graduate of the United States Air Force Academy and is an officer in the new branch of the military, the Space Force.
Dang, I want to talk about the Space Force, but let's kind of start from the beginning. So obviously, quite the journey there, and obviously a whole lot going on. One thing I did want to dive into is hostage negotiation, which I'm sure a lot of people are very interested in that. What got you onto there? Is there like a normal call to action that gets people in there, or is it just kind of a right place, right time type of situation?
For me, it was pretty much right place, right time. I've always in my life wanted to be associated with the best. And usually, SWAT are the best officers with the best training and the best equipment. So when there was an opening as a negotiator, I put in for it and, had to do the physical fitness requirement, run a mile and a half, do push ups and sit ups, meet with the command staff, meet with the psychologist, take psychological exams, all that kind of stuff, and then meet with the team. And it was an all or nothing. I mean, if one person on the team said, "Hey, I've worked with Terry before. He's difficult. He's hard to work with. He's hard to get along with," then you didn't get on. And so I was fortunate enough to make it over, I guess, all those hurdles and got to a point where I was selected to be a hostage negotiator. So a lot of fun. I mean, for those who don't understand how SWAT is usually configured on most police or sheriff's departments, there's usually a tactical team. Those are the men and women who have all the toys, the guns, the armored cars, the tear gas, all that stuff. And then there are the negotiators. And we used to joke with the tactical team that if we did our job right, you didn't get to use all your toys and things like that. So it was a lot of fun. We got along great and we trained together all the time. So it was a great experience for me.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I think my experience with hostage negotiation, if you will, is Chris Voss's Never Split the Difference, which I think a lot of people are familiar with. And then I'm very interested in Waco, the whole
Oh,
Branch
yeah.
Davidians.
David Koresh and yeah.
Yep, yep. And so I know there was a lot to do. And if I'm not mistaken, that was kind of like very early in the let's try to negotiate with these types of cult leaders and stuff like that rather than just go full force, which they did the latter, and we know how that ended up. And so obviously there's like a lot of psychology behind that, and I'm a big fan of that. But I'd like to hear kind of your thoughts on like the Chris Voss Never Split the Difference, because I think that's more, I guess, if you would consider mainstream type of negotiation slash it's mostly sales.
Yeah, it's a lot of sales, and I've Chris Voss has probably forgotten more about hostage negotiation than I've ever known. So I've read his book. I've actually our daughter gave us the master class program, so I was on his master class. I mean, the guy is amazing, and it's not just about hostage negotiation. It's about how we interact with each other. I mean, one of the things that we would use, and a lot of times we would get on scene, Jordan, and it would be like, "Oh, why are we here? What precipitated this? How did this person decide to barricade themselves with a gun or take hostage or whatever it was?" So we didn't know what was going on. So we would start out with what was called tactical empathy. And I think you can get rid of the word tactical and just talk about empathy. In other words, if I was negotiating with you, Jordan, it would be, Jordan, help me to understand what's going on today, or help me to understand where you're coming from. Again, the important word there is understand. I mean, if you were a homicide suspect that just murdered three people, I wasn't going to be like, oh yeah, I totally agree with what you did. There wasn't the agreement. It was more understanding, because understanding breeds trust, and trust gets me to a point where hopefully I can get you, and if there's hostages, get them out safely as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know Chris Voss talks a lot about that. And it's not necessarily, it's the understanding, right? It's trying to get into their head, why are they doing this, rather than saying it's as me versus you, because then you're just having all the defenses come up. And it's very similar to the sales process. And I know Never Split the Difference is how they're very similar, right? And it's just effective communication, right? And it's talking about how can we make it seem like we're on the same side of the table rather than facing each other, combating each other. And I found his book very, very powerful in that respect.
Yeah, I thought his book was amazing, and a lot of it's like, oh yeah, I learned that, or oh yeah, they taught us that, and things like that. I mean, we worked with a psychologist. We had a psychologist that trained with our team, and the way we learned really was, you'd read about different hostage situations in the newspaper or online or something like that, and I was like, okay, let's reenact those, and then let's debrief. And the psychologist might say, hey, did you ever think this person had schizophrenia and was off their medication? No, I didn't think about that. I mean, it was great having a psychologist, but he wasn't there at 3 o'clock in the morning when you were negotiating with somebody, in the middle of the night, and that. So there was a lot of sort of, I'm not going to say trial. I mean, we were very successful. About 90% of the time we got the person out successfully, or we got the hostages out successfully. We never lost a hostage. But about 10% of the time, like I said, if this guy was a homicide suspect and he knew he was caught, and he knew that if he came out, he was going to spend the rest of his life in prison, sometimes they would say, you know what? No, I'm going out on my terms. I'm going to end my life, my way. And while that was always tragic, I mean, anytime somebody dies, it's tragic. I don't mean to sound callous about this. I never lost any sleep over it. I mean, I knew I was doing the best I could to get that person out. I knew I had great training, and I knew I worked with great people. But at the end of the day, it was really their decision. I mean, are you going to come out? Are we going to have to send the tactical team in to get you? Are we going to have to put in, tear gas and try to smoke you out, so to speak? How is this going to end? That was your decision. I was just trying to get you out as safely as possible. But like I said, at the end of the day, it was your decision how this was going to end.
Yeah, and absolutely. And not everything's sunshine and rainbows. So it sounds like even on that 10%, that sounds like it was the best possible outcome given circumstances.
Absolutely.
Cool. And so from there, you said you started coaching after that, correct?
I did, yes.
Nice. So I bet that you said it was girls basketball, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, it was girls basketball, and you got to understand, I have no sisters, so I mean, and all my brothers are athletes. I had my youngest brother pitched for the University of Notre Dame. My middle brother was a Division II All-American in basketball, drafted by the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA. So we were all athletes, and I'll never forget. My wife and I went to the doctor, to the OBGYN when she was pregnant. The doctor's like, "Do you want to know the sex of the baby?" And we were like, "Yeah, sure, that'd be great." Doctor was like, well, you should buy pink. And I was like, oh, no. You need to leave it in there till it's done. I have no idea how to raise a girl. But unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, my daughter got my height and also had an NBA three-point shot, and actually went to the Air Force Academy to play basketball until she blew out her knee freshman year and ended that career. But yeah, I mean, coaching girls was certainly a unique experience for me.
Yeah, especially probably coming from SWAT negotiation too. Probably similar tactics, but you had to be a little bit more less callous with it.
Yeah, it was just different. I'll give you a quick story. I remember we were playing a game, and I pointed to one of the girls on the bench, and I said, go in for so-and-so. And, she shakes her head in the affirmative, and, I go back to coaching, and out of the corner of my eye, I can see the scores table, and there's nobody there. And so I turn back and I look at her and I'm like, get in the game for so-and-so. And, okay, coach, okay. And then I turn back and I'm coaching. And again, nobody at the scores table. And I finally turn and look, I'm like, get in the game. And now she's shaking me off like a big league pitcher or something like that, who doesn't like the signs. Like, no, I don't like, what else? let's do the curveball. And I'm like, oh my God, what? Are you telling me you're not going to go into the game? So I bring her to me and I look at her and I'm like, I need you in the game. What's the problem? And then the tears start, down the cheeks. And I'm like, are we going to have a counseling session in the middle of a high school basketball game? And we did. She was like, Coach, I don't want to go in the game. I said, there are no uniform wearers on this team. You don't just get to wear a uniform and sit on the bench. Like, you come to practice every day, you make yourself better, you make your teammates better. Why don't you want to go in the game? Because my friends are in the stands, and if I make a mistake, they'll make fun of me. And I said, well, what about your responsibility to your teammates who you come out here every day and work to make better? Don't you have a responsibility to them? What if you don't go in? I mean, so I need you to go in. I've got a player that's exhausted. I need you to sub out for them. And finally got her to see that there was another side of this. It's not just about your friends. It's also about your teammates, and got her to go in the game. But Jordan, I'd never in my life as a guy, in a basketball game, if a coach pointed you and said, go in, you're like, yeah, let's go. I mean, I can't wait. And these girls, it was just a different psyche. I mean, I would be devastated after losing a basketball game. I'd be on the bus, looking at the film and making notes. They'd be in the back having a great time talking about, what they were going to do after school that night. I was like, it was just different. I mean, girls are competitive, don't get me wrong, but girls play sports for a different reason. It's more about the camaraderie. It's more about the relationships that they build, I think, than it is with guys. Guys are like, yeah, I'm part of a team and I like you guys, but you know what? I want to play. Girls are more like, I want to develop a relationship.
Yeah, and I mean, plus it's high school, so not a lot of people take high school seriously, just in general. And so it's not like you were in the WNBA. So
Exactly.
I could definitely see how it would be much more chill and relaxed. Although I played high school sports and I took it very seriously, especially football. Football, I think they try to pretend like it's like college, but it's not.
I mean, it's not, but I mean, my younger brother who pitched for Notre Dame has been a high school basketball coach in Chicago for decades now. He's in the Illinois High School Athletic Hall of Fame, and he coached Michael Jordan's two sons when he was in high school,
Okay.
or when he was at Loyola Academy, and they were in high school. And he tells me now, he said, with this whole, with AAU as prominent as it is in recruiting and things like that, and with the whole NIL thing in college, he said, you now have to really, even in high school, recruit your own players. Because they may be playing with a kid on an A team who's like, oh, you don't like it there? Well, then, hey, just come live with me and my parents and you can go to this school instead of there. So he said, even in high school now, you're having to recruit your own players to get them to stay.
Yeah, I mean, especially at that height, you know what I mean? I went to a small high school, and that was not the case. So, okay, so I want to shift gears a bit. You talked about focusing on your four truths, and I really want to lean into that because they very much resonate with just overall, like me, my philosophy, my coaching philosophy. So can we dive into that a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. So I've got four truths here. I've got them on a Post-it note that I see multiple times during the day. So they constantly get reinforced in my mind. And they're just one sentence each. So I'll give them to you and we can talk about all of them, some of them, whatever you'd like to do. So the first one is control your mind or your mind is going to control you. The second one is embrace the pain and the difficulty that we all experience in life and use that pain and difficulty to make you a stronger and more resilient individual. The third one I look at kind of more as a legacy type of truth, and it's this: what you leave behind is what you weave in the hearts of other people. And then the fourth one I think is pretty self-explanatory. As long as you don't quit, you can never be defeated. And I sort of refer to these four truths as sort of the bedrock of my soul. I just think they're a good place to try to start to build a quality life off of.
Yeah, no, and I agree 1000%. Where did you either come up with these? Where did you get these four truths?
So it is kind of a funny story. So I was on a podcast called The Three Truths. And I'm like, okay, I've got to think about this. I've got to, I don't want to just, pull something out. I want something that really resonates with me. So I had 1, 2, and 4 of what I just gave you. And then I added the legacy truth. We like things as human beings in threes, but I just felt that legacy truth was so important that it needed to be part of the truth. So I used the 3 when I was on the podcast, and then I thought about it more and I added that 4th one. So they're just, like I said, they're things I talk about. They're things that not only I talk about, but that I try to live. It's not just talk the talk, it's walk the walk as well. And I just think they're incredibly important. And whatever you're doing in life, whether it's, emotional, physical, spiritual, whatever that ends up being, I think they're good. They're good, a good base, a good foundation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think you really hit it a lot because it's all about like internal, like how you see yourself. And I really like number 2, but I want to talk about them in order. So control your mind so it doesn't control you. I think that's huge in what I do. And I'm an online health and fitness coach who helps gamers primarily. And the reason why I like serving gamers is because a lot of time gamers will escape into a fantasy world. And so they're kind of letting their anxieties control them by forcing them to escape the real world into some game, fantasy story, whatever it is, whatever their medium is. It's the anxieties, fear of failure that's preventing them from taking action, preventing them from doing number 2, embracing discomfort. And so what steps and tools or tidbits do you use to really capitalize on controlling the mind so it doesn't control you? Also, side note, I'm a big Dune fan, if you can't tell, and the litany of fear is the mind killer, and so this all plays into that. And so, what do you do to help control your mind?
Yeah, I think fear is one of the biggest reasons why people don't do, what you're like to do that. Ooh, no, I'm scared. And I don't want to do that. And, I go back. I mentioned, when I was in high school, I had 3 knee surgeries. And I remember when I went back playing basketball after those knee surgeries, that my brain was putting all kinds of negative thoughts into my mind. Things like, hey, you're probably a step slower since your operations. College coaches aren't going to be reaching out, to recruit you. I remember thinking, wait a minute, I'm still playing at an elite level, and coaches are still reaching out about the possibility of playing for their college or university. I learned, when I was like 15 years old, that I needed to change the narrative. I needed to look at thoughts differently. And if you think about it, thoughts in and of themselves, the Cleveland Clinic estimates that we have about 50 to 70,000 thoughts that pass through our mind every day. But thoughts in and of themselves are neutral. They're arbitrary. They pose us no issues at all. Where we get into problems is when we start thinking about those thoughts and we apply emotions to them. When we apply, I felt this way when that happened and stuff like that. Now, all of a sudden, now we get into an issue. And one of the things that I always recommend with people, and I'm going to tell you a story here in a minute, but one of the things I always recommend is that whatever's bugging you, and if you've got a problem, an issue, just take a piece of paper and write down everything that's bothering you. Get everything out of your head and put it on that piece of paper. And then go through it and cross out everything that you personally have no control over. And whatever's left on that piece of paper is something that you can work on. And I think it's a very simple exercise, but it's a very effective way of dealing with all the things that are going on in your head. When I was in college, I mentioned I went to the Citadel, which is a military college. And in 1979, it was my sophomore year, we had a president by the name of James Stockdale. And Stockdale had been a naval aviator during the Vietnam War. He retired from the Navy as a rear admiral, and he was now the president of the college. And during the Vietnam War, he was shot down. And he spent 8 years as a prisoner of war in the infamous Hanoi Hilton prisoner of war camp. He spent a lot of time around. I mean, he was the president of the college. I was just a cadet. But I remember being at an event where somebody asked him, who were the people that survived that torture, that abuse, that brutality? And this is what he said. He said, well, let me tell you who didn't survive. He said it wasn't the big, strong, tough guys that thought that they could handle any kind of abuse or torture. And he said the other group that didn't survive, and this surprised the heck out of me, was he said the other group that didn't survive were the optimists. He said these were the guys who thought that they would be let go or rescued by Thanksgiving or Christmas or Easter. And he said Thanksgiving, Christmas, and Easter would come and go and they wouldn't be released. And he said those people died of a broken heart. He said the people that survived were the people who understood what they could control, which according to Stockdale were basically the thoughts in our mind and the breathing in our lungs. Everything else was at the discretion of the enemy and controlled it. And he talks about what's called the Stockdale paradox, which basically says you can never afford to not understand where you are, but you also must understand the reality of your situation. You've always got to be positive. You always got to think you're going to come out on the other end, but you also have to understand that, hey, this is reality. This is the way things are right now. And try to control your thoughts and whatever else you can control. And playing sports, you know this. I mean, there are certain things on a football team, on a basketball team, that you can control. The score, winning or losing, is not one of those things. It's more about the processes. I mean, I don't set goals anymore. I just look at my processes. Are the things that I am doing leading me to be where I want to be in my life?
Yeah, and it's a big thing. It's like hope for the best, prepare for the worst, or expect the worst. Yeah, I like that. And that is huge because, like we talked about fear, and even the story with the high school basketball player, it was fear that was preventing her from taking action. And so I'm a big, firm believer in that. And I actually kind of half jokingly say a big part of my job as a coach is to chip away at that mindset. Really, in my field, it's the perfectionist mindset that is preventing all of this, because if you can't do it 100% perfectly, then you're a quote unquote failure, so therefore you shouldn't do it at all. And a lot of people fall into the, well, I just won't do anything at all mindset. And so it's always chipping away at that by, instead of focusing on your goal, let's say in a year you want to lose 50 pounds, that's an outcome that you can't directly control, right? But you can control what your diet looks like, how many times a week you're working out, and try to be consistent without focusing on perfection. If you do a 4-day workout split and you can only do 3 days, especially, the last couple of weeks, if you can only do 3 days, that's still a win. It's not a all or nothing type of mindset. I always like to say life isn't a pass fail class, right? And so it's chipping away at that.
Have you ever read this book?
I have not.
Okay, it's called With Winning in Mind, and it's written by this guy named Lanny Basham. And Basham was an Olympic and world champion shooter. And the Navy SEAL sniper teams, the Marine Corps sniper teams, the Army sniper team, all these people use his With Winning in Mind. It's basically a way to set goals. And he talks a lot about controlling what you can control. He talks a lot about, are your processes the best they can be? And it's interesting, I just finished a book written by a former SEAL who eventually kind of revamped the whole sniper team with the SEALs. And it used to be kind of like Bud's was. We're trying to wash you out. We're trying to get rid of as many people who don't have the mental capacity, mental fortitude to do this. But he said, we've switched in the sniper team to having the instructors be responsible for the students. If you're having trouble during the day, hey, I'll work with you after hours to get you whether it's mental, whether it's your processes, how you're shooting, how you're aiming, your trigger pull, whatever it ends up being. So it went from we're trying to get rid of you to we're trying to help you be as successful as possible. It's kind of interesting.
And it sounds like it's more or less of see how many of these people are naturally what we're looking for versus how many people can we actually nurture and craft to become who we want them to be.
Exactly.
Nice. I assume you're familiar with David Goggins.
Very, yes.
Yeah, I've listened to his books, and I like listening to his books, his audiobooks, because they do essentially like mini podcasts between each chapter. So you get a lot of insight between him and I forget the guy who narrates. He's also the ghostwriter. I think his name's Alex Ryan, somewhere around there. Anyway, they go back and forth, and you learn a lot about what happened between the lines in the chapter and stuff like that. So if you haven't listened to his books, I highly recommend them.
Yeah, I've read both of them. I have not listened to them, though. Okay.
Yeah, listening to them is nice because it adds a significant amount of value to between the chapters. And I know he doesn't do a whole lot of like additional podcasts. I think he says he limits himself to like 1 or 2 a year or something like that because he's gotta quote unquote stay hard. But I always find his stuff very insightful, but also very extreme. And so when you were talking about Buds, it sounds like he went through the older form of Buds.
Yeah, I mean, he's been through, I think he's the only person to go through BUDS, which is Navy SEAL, the Army Ranger School, and the Air Force Pararescue School. All three of those are incredibly hard. So just to go through one of them is amazing, but to be able to accomplish going through all three of them is even more amazing.
Yeah, and he went through buds 3 times.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, I think he only fully 100% completed it once, but he went through it 3 times. So, and it was like his last chance. He's been through a lot, and he likes that. He likes going through it. That type of
Yeah,
that
he uses his
mindset.
pain. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Which is a good segue into point number 2: embracing discomfort. You thought I would have planned that out, but I did not. Um, so have you read or heard of what's his name? Michael Esther. He wrote The Comfort Crisis.
I have not read the book, but yes, I've heard of him. Yes.
It's very on par with this line to where we as, a society, first world country, we get way too comfortable essentially. And what happens is, putting this into like D&D terms, we stay in this comfort zone, and this comfort zone essentially removes our like our autonomy, and we become, non-player character or an NPC of our own life, to where life just keeps passing us by. And if we break out of that comfort zone, that's where discomfort is, but that's where growth happens, right? And that's like staying in the tutorial world because you don't want to venture into fighting stronger enemies, which you have to fight stronger enemies to level up, and that's very akin to life. You have to brace that discomfort. However, there's obviously a range of discomfort. And so if you keep nudging the comfort zone, that discomfort won't be too extreme. But a lot of times, again, that all or nothing mindset, people think they need to go to the extreme, which is extremely uncomfortable. And then that chases them back to the comfort zone. And so I really want to hear more about your philosophy and kind of diving into that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in grade school, I was playing basketball against college kids, and I was getting creamed. I mean, I was getting my clock cleaned all the time, but I was also getting better. I had to up my game, because there's no way, as a 14-year-old kid, just coming out of eighth grade, that I was anywhere physically or emotionally mature enough to deal with these guys. I mean, they were just, if you talk about boys playing against men, that was absolutely, what I was doing. And I'll give you a quick story. So my brother is the president of Marist High School in Chicago, a large Catholic high school where we graduated from. And the Marist, it's run by the Marist Brothers, a Catholic group of brothers who educate. That's what they do. And they asked my brother to go to Guatemala and review the school in Guatemala. And my brother was like, third world country, not so sure how stable the government is, not sure I really want to do that. But they convinced him to do that. So he gets off the plane in Guatemala, 10 o'clock at night. Nobody in the airport except all these armed guards with AKs. He gets into an armed convoy once he goes through customs, taken through the city. He notices that so many of the businesses have armed guards in front of the businesses. And then he goes to the Marist compound where he spends the night. So the next morning they get up and they go up into the mountains. And he said, we're driving towards the school, and you just see fields of whatever crops they're growing, and huts, basically where these people live. And so he gets to the school and he starts talking to the principal, and he says to him, how do you handle things like bullying and racism and fighting and the things that we deal with here in the United States in our schools? And he said, the principal looked at him like, what are you talking about? He said, well, how do you handle that when kids bully each other, or they fight each other because, one's black and one's Hispanic, or whatever it ends up being? And the principal looked at him and he said, we don't have those problems. He said,
Right.
you saw on the way to the school, he said, our students live in abject poverty. They live in huts with dirt floors, no running water, no indoor plumbing. The poorest kid at your school would be considered incredibly affluent here in Guatemala. He said these kids realize the only way they're going to get their families out of this type of poverty is to get an education. So they don't spend time bullying each other. They don't spend time, on racism or sexism or whatever. They just try to get an education to get their families out of this situation. And my brother came back with a different perspective. The things that we in the United States, kind of first world problem things, are not problems in a lot of other parts of the country. So the whole thing about, embracing the pain, How do you do that? How do you embrace your pain in life? And I'm going to give you something that I do every day. So every day of your life, do one thing at least that scares you, that makes you nervous, that makes you uncomfortable, that's potentially embarrassing. It doesn't have to be a big thing. But if you do those small things every day, it's kind of like what you were saying. You're stepping outside your comfort zone to do something that makes you uncomfortable. If you do those small things every day, when the big disasters in life hit us, and they hit all of us, somebody close to us dies, we unexpectedly get let go from our job, we find out we have a chronic or a terminal illness, you will be so much more resilient to handle those things when they happen.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you know who Dr. Huberman is? Did you see his podcast episode with him and David Goggins?
Yeah, I did. Yes.
There's he talks about this, and I'm gonna butcher the name. I'm pretty sure I thought it was the mid-anterior cortex. Anyway, there's a spot in your brain. It's essentially kind of like your discipline center in a way, to where it only grows if you do things you don't like. So like, let's say you don't like working out and you work out to the point where you start liking it, then that part of the brain kind of shuts off. And so like you were saying, you got to kind of keep strengthening that part of the brain by doing things that you don't enjoy, that you are afraid of. And it doesn't have to be like, jumping out of a plane every day, right? It can be having a random conversation with a stranger in the grocery store, or walking into the gym for the first time, or even just doing some body weight stuff at home. You're not going to like that because it's uncomfortable and awkward because you've never done it before. But the risk, is quite low. But slowly working your way up. And again, in gaming terms, you're fighting off, first and second level enemies, versus what a lot of people do is they'll try to fight end game bosses right in the beginning, which again is not going to, you're not setting yourself up for success, you're setting yourself up for failure that way. And so what are some things that you do that scare you on that day-to-day basis?
Yeah, I'm still in treatment I have tumors in my lungs, so I'm still in treatment for these tumors. And I have a terrible reaction. And I go every 3 weeks for 4 days and get this drug that makes me shake violently. I throw up. I have, so I experience that. I don't have to go find it. It finds me. But one of the other things that I do, just for example, is when I take a shower, at the end of the shower, I will turn the water as cold as it possibly can be, and I'll spend 2 or 3 minutes underneath that cold water. It sucks. I hate it. It's terrible. But, and I think the science is still out on whether cold therapy gives us the immune system benefits and things like that. There is some science, but I think, you should do this has outpaced the science as to whether it's good or not. But if nothing else, it's uncomfortable. And it allows me to say, okay, if I can do this, then I can go for my treatments and things like that. The other day, I hate going to the dentist. The other day I picked up the phone and, made my 6-month appointment to go have my teeth cleaned. And I'm sure your audience is probably like, oh, dentist, no big deal. When you hate the dentist as much as I do, yeah, it is a big deal. So just those things, you get up in the morning, make your bed. You've got to win immediately. I read a statistic the other day that said a third, which this just blows me away, a third of Americans admit to hitting the snooze button on their phone at least 3 times every day.
Jeez.
That's usually 15 minutes. So 3 times 15, that's 45 minutes. What could you do if you didn't hit the snooze button and got up and had 45 minutes? Could you meditate? Could you have a writing practice? Could you work out? What could you do? You could do a lot of things if you didn't waste those 45 minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And again, like what you were saying, it doesn't have to be big. It can seem almost minuscule or like inconsequential. But if that's something that makes you uncomfortable, there's a phrase that the worst thing that's ever happened to you is the worst thing that's ever happened to you, right? And for some people it could be something being a prisoner of war. Some people it could be getting a flat tire. It depends on how lucky of a life I guess I've had, to put it in one way. But it's still going to be the worst thing that's ever happened to you. And so everybody has their own like playing field or their own starting point. And so having something that could be, like going for a walk, checking the mail, going outside, if you have some form of, generalized anxiety or social anxiety, just going shopping. Or what I like to do is like a pickup order. It's where if you have to go in, you have to, kind of be around people, but you don't have to go through the whole store. And so again, that's kind of a way to slowly integrate those things. And it's not the extreme. And so
it's not. When you were saying that, I was thinking about, there's a professor at the University of Chicago who does this experiment with his students. He's a psychology professor. And the idea is you go out and you get on a bus, and in 3 questions, you go deep with somebody. Because social media never allows us to go deep. We just stay
Right.
on the surface. Everything's great, everything's wonderful. And we know that's wrong. We know we all have problems. But you go out, you sit down next to somebody on a bus, and first question, hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm fine, how are you? Second question, and I'm just making this up. What do you do for a living? Oh, I'm a doctor. Okay. Third question, have you always wanted to be a doctor? No, I grew up on a farm and I wanted to be a veterinarian, but X, Y, and Z happened. Yeah, my mom was a doctor and she died of breast cancer when she was 40, so I'm honoring her memory by being whatever the answer is. Now you're deep with somebody. Now you're getting to their why they do what they do with their life. And we just don't do that with people. And it's amazing. I don't know how you feel, Jordan, but whenever I'm curious. That was one thing we were taught as SWAT negotiators. Be curious. Want to know why people do what they do. The books that I read are mostly biography. Why did that person do what they do? What were they thinking? What was their mental acumen when they were doing that? I want to know those things because maybe I can learn from that. So another way, do something uncomfortable. Read books about what other people do. That way, you can, in a safe environment, learn how other people think, thought, or made decisions in their life.
Yeah, absolutely.
Reading books that, let you kind of peer into what people were thinking, why they made the decisions they made at the time they made them and things like that, given all the things that were going on in their life. I think that's a safe way of kind of learning other people's thoughts without having to put yourself out there in a way that might be scary.
Yeah, exactly. Learning from other people's mistakes, essentially. You mentioned just like curiosity. When you were talking about that beforehand, I was thinking that that's a large part of what you probably did with negotiation, but it's also a large part of sales, to where negotiation and sales are not dissimilar. They're very similar.
Yeah.
To where your main job, at least for me, there's a lot of people who do sales wrong. But for me, my main job is I want to get a better understanding of you and your goals and kind of get that deeper why and figure out what would be a good fit for you, whether it is, working with us or not. I want to get a good insight on how things are going so that way I can at least try to point you in the right direction, whether it is with us or with not. And it's always having that curiosity mindset. And then that's something that I actually teach to our clients, and that's trying to remove emotion from the data, right? And so if you're a salesperson and you're like, man, I really need this sale to pay my bills, you're going to have a lot more emotion in it to where you're going to maybe guide them to maybe a decision that might not be the right fit or push them a little bit harder and might actually push them away. And then if you're a client, or somebody who's on a health and fitness journey and you're really emotionally tied to the number on the scale and you do everything right, again, doing everything that you can control, but then you step on the scale, which you can't control, and the weight went up. You went up a pound, you're like, man, what the hell? I did everything perfectly for the last week. It gets very discouraging. Rather than if you try to remove the emotion from it, I always say come at things like an investigator, to where you're looking at things, let's say you're weighing yourself daily. You're like, okay, I have 7 points of data. What does this data represent? And what can I extrapolate from this data? What changes need to be made, if any, right? And so it helps. Easier said than done, totally understand. But if you can kind of create that degree of separation to where I'm not emotionally tied to tracking my calories, tracking my weight, or something like that. Ideally, normally it's number driven, but if I'm not emotionally tied to the numbers, it can really help us take a step back and kind of zoom out and focus on what are the trends saying, what does the data represent, and what changes can be made moving forward, rather than I'm a failure, this isn't working, I might as well just stop. What's the point of even trying? Which is that fear, that negative self-talk, that self-doubt that we are talking about for point one. So you can see it all kind of blends together.
It does. It totally blends together. And I think you kind of hit it on something that's really important. I think people like to think that we start at A and then we work really hard and we get to Z. But that's not how life is. Life is not linear. It just doesn't go in a straight line. And I know this from basketball, and I'm sure you know it from football and working out and things like that. You work hard, yeah, you get better. And then you plateau, and you're still working your butt off. But then what? You get worse, and things go down and the scale doesn't look good. But then, you keep working hard and you might plateau again and then you start to go up. I mean, it's more of a sort of, a jagged line than it is a straight line. Get to where you want to be, but it's not. And if you're going to be discouraged the first time you either plateau or you start to trail off and things are getting worse, then yeah, you'll quit, you'll give up. But if you understand That's the way, and that's not just fitness or getting in shape or sports. That's everything in life. No matter how hard you work, you're not going to just keep going up, 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 and up. You're going to plateau. You're going to get worse. But hopefully, if you keep doing what you're doing, you will eventually get to where you want to be. And the other thing I'll say about this is people think that when they get to the end of the rainbow or the top of the mountain, that's I've arrived, I've success. And what you understand is that it's not arriving. It's where life is made, where life is won and lost. It's in the journey to get to the
Yep.
top of the mountain.
Yep, and that's a big thing. Instead of focusing on the outcome, once I hit my goal weight, then I'll be happy. It's focusing on the process and being happy with doing everything that you can. And a big mindset shift that has helped me is humans survive on instant gratification, right? If we were hunter gatherers and we were unable to kill a boar or whatever, or unable to scavenge berries, that could quite literally mean we're starving. And so we need that instant gratification as a survival mechanism. Nowadays, not so much. And so it's our brain telling us, hey, we need to shift gears because we're not seeing immediate results. And so instead of focusing on that 50-pound weight goal, having the goal be, I need to work out, or I get to work out, I get to eat a little bit healthier, I get to tune up my diet. Those, you get the instant gratification because you're getting to check the box. Yes, I did this. Yes, I did this. Yes, I did this. And it allows you to focus on that journey and that process like you were talking about instead of the outcome, which will then really open up your eyes to not hate it as much, right? You'll enjoy it. You'll start to enjoy it. You start to look forward to the workouts. One thing that I'll tell my clients is most clients have a point in their life, I call it like an aha moment, where they had a stressful day at work. And then they messaged me saying the only thing they could think about is they couldn't wait to get home to work out because they see working out as a stress relief versus a stressor. And I'm just like, you just won the game. The game, you just put the game on easy mode. Once you look at healthy habits as a stress relief versus an obstacle to overcome, it's game over, right? Like you just won the game. And I think focusing on the process versus the outcome is a good way to kind of help shift that mindset.
Absolutely.
Cool. Next one is leave the legacy behind. I really like that because, there's a saying that you're not going to remember what people did, but you're going to remember how they made you feel. And so I'm assuming that's kind of following that line of thinking. So let's dive into that because this is the point that you said you most recently added.
It's the one I added. Yeah. I mean, when I did the, your Three Truths podcast, I had 1, 2, and 4. And then, I think about this. I read, I educate myself and I'm like, okay, I got to tweak this one, or this one I need to add, or I can take this one, whatever it ends up being. And so, yeah, this is the most recent one. And you're a young man. You may not remember a man by the name of Fred Rogers, who had a television show called Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. He educated so many young people, including me, growing up on public television. When Fred Rogers died in 2003, and I know that's eons ago for most people, his family was going through his effects and they found his wallet. And inside his wallet was a scrap piece of paper on which Mr. Rogers had written 4 simple words. Life is for service. Jordan, you and I probably know people that are out there that think when they're born empty. And that when they get out of school and they get into life, whatever that looks like, that then their job is to fill up their empty self. I got to get the best job. I got to make the most money, drive the nicest car, have all the latest gadgets and gizmos. And that's not what life is about. Life is about what you give, not about what you give. Your life, there's never going to be a time where you're full because there's always going to be one more thing that you're going after. The latest iPhone, the latest earbuds, the latest gaming, whatever it ends up being. If I get that, I'll be happy. You won't. You'll never be happy. Where you'll be happy is when you use your unique gifts and talents to help other human beings. I remember when I had part of my cancer journey, I had my leg amputated in the middle of the COVID pandemic, and found out I had these tumors in my lungs. And so I went with my wife to the mortuary, to the cemetery, and to the church, and I planned my funeral. And because I talk about motivation, I go on podcasts and I discuss motivation and mindset, I actually got some brushback from people who commented that somehow planning my funeral was in some way defeatist. And I had to remind these people that the last time I checked, we're all going to die. As far as I know, nobody's working on a cure for life right now. Every one of us is going to die, but not every one of us is truly going to live. And I heard a Native American Blackfoot proverb years ago that I absolutely love, and it goes like this: when you were born, you cried, and the world rejoiced. Live your life in such a way so that when you die, the world cries and you rejoice. That's what I want. That's
I
what
like
I'm
that.
looking for.
And I would say most people probably like that sentiment, but don't live off that. There's a saying slash joke, maybe morbid. It says most people die in their 20s, but they're not buried until they're 60. And that is that. Okay, so that's a big part of my branding is breaking out of the NPC mindset and becoming the main character of your life. And that right there is the epitome of the NPC mindset, to where you're just living life, really coasting, and just letting life and all opportunities kind of pass you by, to where you almost feel like a prisoner in your own body, and that pit of despair of just throwing your hands up in the air and saying, what's even the point of trying to progress in my career or in my health and fitness, or emotional life, relationships, etc., because they don't find either value in themselves most of the time, or value in pursuing those things, which is probably circling back to lack of value in themselves. And so a big part of that is, like you said, live life like when you pass, the world will cry and you can rejoice. And I think that that's a very effective way of living life. And a big part of like why I started is, yes, I'm starting a business and I'm making money, obviously, but I want to help as many people as I can. And I kind of say I want to change the world in my own way, like carve out the corner of the world that I can, especially within the gaming community. And it's because I felt like I had that purpose of maybe being in a unique situation to where I can help people traveling down a path similar to mine and do what I can to better their world in my own way. And a big philosophy that I have is, to be successful in life, you have to leave the world in a better spot than where you found it. And that can mean anything, right? That doesn't have to be, I helped a lot of people lose weight and have a healthier BMI. It could be a lot of things. And it could be raising an awesome family that is then, they're going to be spreading joy and stuff into the world. And so you can kind of see how it's a compounding effect, where you have contact with so many people in your life that has a lasting effect, that can have a lasting effect on others. And it has this ripple effect.
It does. And are you familiar with Ed Milet at all?
Not by name, no.
Okay, so he's
Oh,
he's
wait, he has a
he's an
podcast?
entrepreneur. Somebody named him, entrepreneur of the year in
Yep.
2023.
I have seen a few of his podcasts, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's a real interesting guy. Played baseball for the Pacific University, but he talks about the four types of people in the world. And when I first heard this, I was like, okay, I got to think about this. Is this really true? And he said, the first group that you'll encounter are the unmotivated people. And he says that's the vast majority of people that you will come across in your life. He said the second group are the motivated. He said it's kind of a carrot and stick approach to life. If I get that, if I do this, I will get that. He says it's kind of low level, but it works for a lot of people to have a very happy and successful life. The third group he talks about are the inspirational people. The word inspiration coming from two words, in spirit. So if you're an inspirational person, you are moving people with your energy. And then the last group he talks about are the aspirational people, where people aspire to be like you. And sometimes if I'm giving a talk and, depending on who the audience is and stuff like that, I'll tell that story and be like, all right, show of hands, how many people are unmotivated? And nobody raises their hand. Nobody ever says, hey, I'm unmotivated. But if you believe Milet, and I think as I've thought about this, so many people are. And, you and I have talked about this. So many people are just they're stuck. And they're not doing anything with their life. They're just kind of muddling through. And if you've never read the book Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, Frankl was a Holocaust survivor. He was in Auschwitz during World War II. And it's a great book, and it's only about 150 pages. He talks about how people should not live their life in the abstract, that we all have a purpose. We all have a meaning to our life, something that we're supposed to do while we're here. And it's almost you have a moral obligation to find and live the reason you were put on the face of this earth. And Jordan, I think so many people never live that purpose because they never even bother to spend the time looking for it. Most people never even contemplate what it means to be great at something purposeful in their life.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's like going back to that NPC mindset to where they just are not really capitalizing on what it means to be like who they are, right? And maybe a lot of times it's they don't know. Like I think a lot of the NPC mindset is just lack of confidence, which, lack of self-worth and all that. I think it all just stems from them not feeling like they have the power to actually do what they want. And like you were saying, nobody's going to raise their hand saying they're unmotivated because there's a part of their brain that's saying they want to achieve these things, but when it comes down to it, they either might not know the steps, appropriate steps, or maybe they think the steps are too big because they don't know what to do to fill those gaps to make the steps easier or smaller. Or it's that all or nothing mindset to where like, oh, I can't become a millionaire because I can barely break, $50,000 salary. And it's like, well, you're not expected to make $1 million next year. It's like, let's kind of slowly improve that. And I think that can be, again, it's just overall very paralyzing to have that NPC mindset, and being able to break through that incrementally, it seems to be kind of like what your four truths are focused around.
Exactly.
And we can talk about the last one real quick.
Sure.
Pretty much don't give up.
Yeah, and I'll just, the way this kind of resonates with me, I think, like, it's pretty self-explanatory, is that, this truth resonates in such a way so that someday my pain, my cancer journey is going to end. It may end through surgery, it may end through some new medication that came up on the market. Quite frankly, it may end when I die. But if I quit, if I give up, if I give in to pain, pain will always be a part of my life.
Yeah, and it's especially when going through a journey with cancer and everything, it's very easy, from what I've heard, to just kind of give up. And then when that happens, health declines exponentially. And I remember when I was in college, I went to a community college for 2 years. One of our assignments, it was in psychology, if I'm not mistaken, was to interview a professional in the field that we wanted to get into. And at the time, it was physical therapy. So I interviewed a physical therapist, and he's like, you can take the healthiest person in the world, tell them they have cancer, and in 6 months, they'll probably develop cancer. Like if they believe it, then the body's going to manifest it. And especially when you're talking about stress and anxiety and hormones getting crazy, there are physical manifestations of that. And so when you are only focusing on the negative side of things, then your body is going to be preparing and responding physically to all the negatives. It's like the red car theory. If all you think about is red cars, or if red cars are vital to survival, that's all you're going to see. And so when you're only focusing on the negative, that's all you're going to see. And so shifting that mindset to the positive and seeing the good in things and the light at the end of the tunnel, so to speak, rather than the negative and the pit of despair, it should make the journey a lot easier.
It should. I mean, and I'm a perfect example. I mean, I was told in 2012 I would be dead in 2 years.
Oh,
Well,
wow.
I'm not dead in 2 years. I didn't take what the doctor said to the bank. But conversely, I know people who doctors have said, oh, you've got cancer, you'll be dead in 2 years. And Jordan, I swear, almost to the day that the doctor predicts it, they die. And you're right. It's all how you look at it. I mean, what doctors don't understand is that you want to see your daughter graduate from college. You want to see her walk down the aisle. You want to play with your grandkids. And those kind of things to look forward to are incredibly motivating to keep your mind going on something positive instead of focusing on all the negative.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just having that essentially that inner fight in you to keep going is what will be that difference. Well, awesome, Terry. I appreciate the time. I'm looking at it. At the time, we only have like a minute left. Why don't you give us a quick rundown on how we can get a hold of you? I believe you have a book as well. You want to talk about that?
Yeah, I have a book called Sustainable Excellence, 10 Principles to Leading Your Uncommon and Extraordinary Life. I wrote that during the healing process after I had my leg amputated. You can get that anywhere. You can get a book online, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Apple iBooks. And you can reach me, and I love hearing from people. So please, if you got anything out of this conversation with Jordan and I, please reach out to me. Let me know what you thought, and you can do that at motivationalcheck.com.
Nice. I like that because in D&D, a check is like you have to roll the dice to do like a stealth check or something like that. So I assume that's not why you made it like that, but
It's
it
not,
definitely
but that's
resonates. It resonates with us. So cool. Again, I appreciate you hopping on, and this was a good chat. And I will put a link in the description for all of the Amazon and everything like that. And so, again, I appreciate you hopping on, and until next time.
Well, thanks for having me on, Jordan.